Welcome to Becoming Limitless. This is the podcast for entrepreneurs who want to optimize their brain and their body with biohacking. I'm going to teach you how to eliminate brain fog and upgrade your health so you can have more productivity, energy, and growth in your business. I'm your host, Tanessa Shears. Let's jump in. Welcome back to the Becoming Limitless podcast, episode 16. This is a great episode, and I'm so excited to share it with you. But first, how has your week been? What has been going on in your life that has been keeping you excited, making you feel healthy, and making you feel energized? I would always love to hear everything that you learn and implement from the podcast. And the best way to connect with me is over on Instagram. I'm at Tanessa Shears. I share all kinds of fun stuff from podcast interviews to weekly biohack tips. This is the place to go, and I want to hear from you. So can I ask you a favor right now? If you are loving the content of this podcast and you're getting so much out of it, could you please leave me a review on whatever platform you are listening to these podcasts on? Or even better yet, share it on your Instagram story. Whether you're listening to it in the car or on a walk, snap a photo of yourself and tag me. I'd love to see where you guys are listening to the podcast. It's so much fun when I see people driving home from work and getting their brain all fired up about having better sleep, or they're cooking or grocery shopping and they're listening to how to manage your insulin. It is so much fun and really makes it rewarding. So I would be honored if you would share this episode if you found you learned something from it, and think of it as a way of not only sharing what you love, but about helping other entrepreneurs like you find the show. So I've got a fun story for you today that I think all entrepreneurs can relate to. Now, I know as an entrepreneur, there is a good chance that you have a love affair with coffee. We usually love that cup of coffee first thing in the morning, and not all of us do, but a lot of us, this is the best part of the morning. It's that quiet time before you get to work. It's that experience you have of holding that hot cup of coffee as your day gets started. The whole day is in front of you, and because it's just started, nothing has gone wrong yet. No problems have come up yet. It is such a good feeling. Like, I remember my very first cup of coffee. I was taking a class at the downtown campus of the Simon Fraser University School of Kinesiology, and I was out with a couple classmates, and we were between classes. And Van Hoot, which is a coffee company, they had a booth or like a tent outside of the SkyTrain station, and they were giving away free cups of coffee, and I had never had a cup before, but all of the girls I was with, they all grabbed a cup of coffee, and I was like, sure, I want to join in. I want to hold a hot beverage. I'll grab a free cup of coffee. And I remember sipping it, and I wasn't that big of a fan of it because I didn't really know how I liked my coffee then. I didn't know whether to put in cream or sugar, but I remember being like, meh, it's not that great. And I remember going back to class, and it was a physiology class that I was taking, and I remember sitting in class and the caffeine hit me for that first time, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna take so many notes. I'm so awake right now. And this used to be a class where I used to get really tired, and when you ever sat in a really long lecture and you're just like, oh my gosh, and your eyes are drifting shut and you're like, no, I have to pay attention because I'm gonna have an exam on this. That was where my brain was, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so clear. I'm so focused. I literally felt like Bradley Cooper when he took that Limitless pill and he was like, yes. And I was like, this is magic stuff. How has nobody told me about coffee before? And that was where my love affair with coffee began. And it only got worse. There were these family-owned coffee shops that were all over campus and university called Renaissance. And oh my gosh, I didn't know, but they have flavors of coffee. They had French vanilla, they had hazelnut, and I used to go there and grab one before my 8 a.m. class. I used to have a biomedical physiology class when I was in university, and it was on detailed physiology and pathophysiology of the gastrointestinal and renal systems. If that name alone made you fall asleep, try sitting through that class at 8:30 in the morning, twice a week for 4 months. So I was like, oh my gosh, I found the best thing in the world. So I'd be sitting there with my coffee and I'd be taking all these notes. But you know what I found out by the end of semester? The coffee that I started with wasn't as powerful as the coffee I ended with, because we know that we develop a tolerance to caffeine. What once worked didn't work at the end of the semester, but I kept at it, and I do enjoy it. And what I ended up doing was I ended up, investing in a coffee machine at my house because I realized that getting that much coffee to keep me awake at school gets very expensive. So I actually ended up just getting a regular old coffee machine. And what I would do is I just ended up making a couple cups of coffee a day. And it wasn't a lot, but I would get like the ground coffee. And I don't even know how much coffee this equals out to, but I would get like 4 tablespoons of percolated coffee every day. And it equaled to about 2 cups. And I love a big cup of coffee. Like I when I moved into my house, I went to HomeSense and I was like, find me the big mugs. Like I don't do no teacups. I don't do these small little coffee cups that came with my plate set. I went and got big coffee cups and they were so intense. I found that the flavor from the coffee that I was making, that I used to call it like, oh my God, my diabetic coffee. I would put stevia in it, a lot of stevia. And I'd put cream in it, and I'd also put flavored cream, like the chocolate mint and stuff like that. It was so sweet. But then I knew, come a couple of years ago, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to get pregnant. And I cannot keep consuming coffee at this level because high caffeine is not good mixed with pregnancy. And I knew I was going to have to cut down. So I had to go through a forced coffee weaning process. And it wasn't until I went through this process that the reason I needed caffeine in the first place was because my lifestyle was a mess. And the caffeine had actually been masking the poor sleep that I'd been having, the poor foods I'd been eating. And there was so much systemic inflammation going on in my body that I was experiencing a very intense amount of brain fog. But until I had to go through this forced weaning process leading up to my first pregnancy, well, that alone was like, holy cow, I've got to do something about this. So now, like present day, I drink a 1 cup of half caffeinated coffee in the morning and I feel great throughout the day. The coffee I have in the morning is something that is more like an experience for me. Like I love hitting my desk with a cup of coffee and just feel those little sparks of caffeine as they kick in. But I know now that it is not because my lifestyle is a mess and I'm making up for all the poor decisions in everywhere else in my life. Like that is what I want to teach you today. And my goal here, hear me out. My goal of this podcast is not to convince you to drop caffeine, but I want you to educate you on how it affects your body so that you can dose effectively. Meaning, if you find what you're doing is great, keep it. If you're open to exploring something else, try it. If you find that, wow, I've been drinking all this coffee because my sleep has been a mess. Well, what if I just fixed my sleep? How much better could I feel? These are all options that are available to you. And I want you to make a decision that is best for you based on the information you have. So I'm going to be giving you my strategy for weaning down if you want to wean down like I did. So for example, I went from having 4 tablespoons of ground coffee in my coffee maker every morning to just 1. So I'll give you my strategy for that. Or I will also teach you my very favorite biohacker that I follow, his bi-monthly coffee detox to save your brain. So stay tuned for that. I'm so excited to share it with you. All right, so I love my science, and that the way my brain works is I don't want to implement anything unless I understand the ins and the outs and the whys of it. So I'm thinking your brain might be like that too. Just me telling you, try cutting down coffee. Your brain might be like, yeah, no. But if you know exactly what is going on and what coffee does, you might be open to exploring other options. So coffee affects your neurotransmitters. So your neurotransmitters are actually like little chemical messengers, and they transmit messages from a nerve cell across the synapse to a target cell. The target cell that neurotransmitter is being delivered to can be another nerve cell, it can be a muscle cell, or it can be a gland. They are chemicals made by the nerve cell specifically to transmit messages. Now, if a couple of words of what I just said to you, you're like, huh? I'm going to make this really simple. So picture this and do this along with me unless you're driving. Then keep your hands on the wheel, all right? So I want you to make a fist with one hand, and I want you to make a fist with the other hand. Now, I want you to put your knuckles together, like you're going to give a fist bump to someone so that you're knuckle to knuckle, and I want you to take a look. So if you're looking at your hands, your left hand is, let's call it nerve A. This is going to be your presynaptic cleft if you want to get fancy with the science. Now, your right hand is going to be, let's call it nerve B, your postsynaptic cleft. You have the left hand is nerve A and the right hand is nerve B. The gap between your knuckles is the gap in which the neurotransmitters travel from nerve A to nerve B. Pretty simple, right? And that is going to be how neurotransmitters transmit messages from one cell to the other. So basically, a neurotransmitter is released from one end, it travels across the gap and lands on the other one and creates a signal. After it is done signaling, so all those neurotransmitters, after they've done their job and they signaled to end B what they wanted it to do, it's either destroyed or it's reabsorbed by your left hand, if that makes sense, your presynaptic cell. This is so that you are not constantly signaling the message from this neurotransmitter. Basically, it's a switch turned off. Now, neurotransmitters are actually so important in our body because if we experience a deficit of one of them, or an imbalance between several of them, or excess, or even changes in these neurotransmitters, they can affect your body processes and result in symptoms such as depression, anxiety, brain fog. We can start becoming easily distracted. We can feel confused. We have reduced ability to solve problems. And I mean, all of those are essential to being an entrepreneur. We need to be clear. We need to be able to make sharp, fast decisions. We need to be able to solve big problems because we all know that the effect of our business and the growth of our business is directly related to the size and the quality of the problem that we solve. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because coffee is one of those things that can not only affect your ability to show up at 90% of peak capacity, but it can affect your sleep. And we all know how much sleep can affect your brain, energy, and clarity. I love sleep. You know, I've talked about it before. I have done at least 3 or 4 episodes so far already on all the different components of sleep, from hacking your sleep environment to getting more deep REM sleep to creating a night routine, all episodes which you should check out if you find that your sleep is not top notch. So I'm not going to tell you to cut out coffee. You can take a deep breath. I'm not going to tell you to cut out coffee because I drink coffee. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you some alternative ideas based on the knowledge that I have discovered through lots of practice, through lots of reading and lots of research. So caffeine isn't something that's necessarily bad that you need to eliminate. In fact, in low doses, caffeine has actually been shown to improve mental performance and protect against certain brain illnesses like Alzheimer's. But what you need to know is that it is a central nervous system stimulant. Your central nervous system is all the nerve cells that make up your brain and your spinal cord. It's super easy to overwhelm your brain and get it all jacked up and overexcited and have it be overstimulated. But the problem with this is it can create resistance to your neurotransmitters over the long term and can cause damage to the receptors on your cells. So if you're creating resistance to something, it means that it no longer has the same effect, meaning 1 cup of coffee doesn't have the same effect on you as when you first started drinking coffee. You're constantly needing to have more to have the same effect. It's kind of like drinking alcohol if you think about it. Like the first time you ever have alcohol, it affects you way more. And you can get drunk off of way less alcohol. But then after a couple times of drinking, you need more alcohol to feel that same level of intoxication. Well, caffeine actually works the same way too. There is actually a barrier that goes around your central nervous system that keeps the bad stuff out. And it's called your blood-brain barrier. This is what keeps toxins out. This is what allows the good stuff in. This is so essential to the health and well-being of our brain. The thing is, caffeine easily crosses this blood-brain barrier. Caffeine then goes into your brain and into the blood, and it binds with a certain type of receptor called an adenosine receptor. Normally, a molecule called adenosine is responsible for binding with adenosine receptors. Now, if we're going to take the example of a non-caffeinated person, somebody who does not drink caffeine, when you wake up in the morning, those adenosine receptors are empty, meaning there's no molecules bound with the receptors. How receptors work are they're kind of like a lock and a key, where the molecule or the neurotransmitter is like the key and the receptor is like the lock. And the key fits specifically into that lock, the same way adenosine fits into an adenosine receptor. So whenever you hear like receptors and molecules, just think key, lock. They go together. So as you go on throughout the day, adenosine builds up on these receptors. Remember, you woke up in the morning and they're empty. All the locks have no keys in them. As you go throughout the day, adenosine builds up on the receptors. There are more keys fitting into all of those locks. This actually makes you tired. This is called your sleep drive or your sleep pressure. The more keys are in the locks or the more receptors are occupied by molecules, this makes you feel more tired. You have the highest level of receptors that are full right before you fall asleep. Now, when you sleep, something fascinating happens. All of that adenosine that are bound with receptors, they break down. And when you wake up, naturally, because all of those molecules were broken down at night, adenosine is at the lowest. This is why you feel most alert in the morning. Your sleep pressure is at the lowest. So essentially, when you go to bed, if we're using our lock and key analogy, all the locks are full of keys, meaning all the locks are filled with individual keys. When you go to sleep at night, it's like someone comes along, takes all the little keys out. Now you just have the lock sitting there again. That's essentially what happens. But here is where caffeine becomes a problem. Caffeine fits perfectly, just like that key to that lock, in the adenosine receptors, and it blocks adenosine from binding. Remember, when adenosine binds, it makes you feel tired. But if caffeine gets in the way and prevents it from binding, you're gonna feel less tired. It prevents you from being tired. So what does your body do? It goes, okay, well, if caffeine is gonna block all the adenosine from binding and driving my sleep pressure up so we can go to sleep at the end of the night, I'm going to make more receptors. So your body goes to work to make more receptors. Now, to counter that, you need more coffee just to feel normal and not sleepy, as your body is constantly trying to win this fight against caffeine. When caffeine is in your receptors, you don't feel tired. Now, here is a fascinating fact about caffeine. Caffeine has a half-life of about 5 to 6 hours. What it means is when you say half-life, after 6 hours, there is half of the amount of caffeine left. So say, for example, you have a 200 milligram cup of coffee. 6 hours later, half of that amount of coffee is still coursing through your blood. So for example, let's do a really easy to follow example. Say you have a cup of coffee at 9 a.m. Half of that coffee is still circulating in your blood at 3 p.m. Then by 9 p.m., so another 6 hours, half of that is gone. So meaning 25% of the original amount is still circulating in your blood. That means by 3 a.m., 12.5%. So we're constantly halving the amount of coffee. So if you have a cup of coffee at 9 a.m., 12.5% of that caffeine is still active in the receptor sites and in your blood at 3 a.m. So what most of us do is we don't have our last cup of coffee at 9 a.m. We have the last cup of coffee at 2 p.m. So that means half the caffeine is left at 8 p.m., half of that is left at 2 p.m., and by 8 a.m. the next morning, you're still at 12.5% of the amount of caffeine. So it makes it very hard to fall asleep and is notorious for disrupting deep sleep. And I gotta tell you, I've worked with so many clients and so many people tell me, oh yeah, no problem. I can fall asleep on caffeine. I have a coffee before bed or after dinner and I go right to sleep. Or they tell me they don't have problems having late coffee. It doesn't affect them. Here is the truth I want you to know. Just because you can have a cup of coffee and go to sleep a couple hours later does not mean it does not affect you. There are actually 3 things I want you to consider. If you have a cup of coffee before bed, it does not mean that you are having quality sleep. You can still fall asleep, but you might be getting junk sleep. These are the people that tell me that caffeine doesn't bug them. These are usually people that don't monitor their sleep quality with a device. So yes, they can still fall asleep, but they may not be able to see the measurable effect of the deterioration in the quality of deep sleep that is happening overnight. Number 2, I want you to think about how much your brain has had to upregulate those adenosine receptors to overcome the late night coffee that you have had. Think of how much your brain has had to put in work to combat the fact that you like to have a late night coffee. This is not a brain in a healthy place. The third thing I want you to think of is think how tired you have to be to actually fall asleep after drinking a stimulant. Like, these are all things that need to be big red flags that we are overriding our natural sleep pressure, our natural sleep drive, the quality of our sleep, and how our brain is supposed to experience that sleep. So I want you to highly consider if this is something that you want to continue doing, knowing from a scientific standpoint how caffeine affects your brain and your ability to experience quality sleep. If you need to go back and listen to this episode again because the science was a little confusing the first time, listen to it. If you want to reach out to me on Instagram, I would love to talk to you about it. But this is something that we need to start prioritizing for our brain health and not just over caffeinating ourselves because our lifestyle isn't performing for our brain the way we want it to be. So what is the solution? The solution is to perform an adenosine receptor reset, and it's not that complicated. This specific method that I'm going to discuss from you, I actually learned from biohacker and expert exerciser Ben Greenfield. He actually wrote one of my favorite books, Boundless by Ben Greenfield. It is full of amazing biohacks and longevity and wellness tips. I love this book. If you haven't picked it up, you got to get it. I'm going to link to it in the description below. But he basically has a protocol, and what it does is it allows your adenosine receptors to regulate after being chronically exposed to caffeine. His method specifically suggests to avoid caffeine completely for 7 to 10 days every 4 to 8 weeks. I'm going to say that again. Avoid caffeine completely for 7 to 10 days every 4 to 8 weeks. What he actually recommends is just switch to decaf. It's not that you can't have that hot beverage in the morning or that experience. It's just to allow your adenosine receptors to regulate. It prevents you from exhausting your neurotransmitters. So he just calls this a basic adenosine receptor reset. Back off the coffee for a little bit, let your body regulate. And then when you go back to drinking coffee, it will have the effect that it had on you the first time, meaning 1 cup and you're going to feel great. You don't need 2, 3, 4 cups of coffee until 6 p.m. at night just to have a productive, focused, clear day, because there are so many other ways to do that that don't involve messing with the neurotransmitters that help you sleep. The second option, if you don't want to perform that reset, is to just keep it to drinking 1 to 2 cups of coffee per day of a medium or dark roast coffee. The reason for that is medium and dark roast coffees are actually lower in caffeine, but higher in antioxidants than their light roast counterparts. So this is something that won't make you cut it out completely, but it does allow your receptors to not get overstimulated. So here's what I did personally. When I knew I was going to get pregnant, I didn't want to have to all of a sudden one day go cold turkey. I was not looking forward to that. So I wanted to make sure that I could put something into place so that I could wean down. So I could end up doing option 2, just drinking that 1 cup of coffee per day and enjoying it. So here's kind of what it looked like when I weaned back. So like I told you earlier in the podcast, when I was drinking coffee earlier on, I would do 4 tablespoons of caffeinated ground coffee into the coffee machine. So I did that. So the first week that I started to do kind of like that detox or that reset, I went from 4 tablespoons to 3 and then subbed in 1 of decaf. The following week, I did 2 tablespoons of caffeinated, 2 tablespoons of decaf. So now I'm like a half. Then I skipped another 1 or 2 weeks and I went down to 1 tablespoon of caffeinated, 1 tablespoon of decaf for ground coffee. So I slowly reduced the tablespoons of caffeinated ground coffee by 1 while slowly upping decaf to swap it out. And I found this works quite well. And like I said, what I realized was that in that time that I was really able to hone in on my nutrition and, get amazing quality sleep, that I never found the need to go back to 4 times the amount of caffeine per day that I am currently consuming. I feel good. And you know what the best part is? On those rare occasion days where I decide to have 2 cups of coffee, I get all of that kind of like sparkle magic adrenaline rush that I got the first time I had a cup of coffee. And it's such a wonderful kind of like gift I get to give myself once in a while still being able to enjoy 1 cup of coffee in the morning. So I hope that has been extremely informative and educational on how caffeine works, how it affects our sleep, and what we can do to make sure that our lifestyle factors are in check and we're not using caffeine to masquerade what is actually going on in our lifestyle choices as far as, our biohacking, our health, and everything like that. So we have used coffee. We are hacking our coffee this week, and I gave you those 2 options. Our whole goal is to rewire our brain so that we can think clearly without needing the coffee all the time. So if you have found that this has been great, what I would really love you to do is check out my Entrepreneur's Playbook. It's called 12 Ways to Biohack Your Energy. I am sharing my very best biohacks, everything from nutrition to sleep to the apps I have on my phone that allow me to hit the floor at 5:30 a.m. every single morning, ready to go, excited to take on my day without the energy drops during the day. It's all about having high energy days that are sharp, clear, and productive, and you're never going to find better biohacks for your energy than I have compiled in this playbook that I'm giving away completely for free. So if you would like to check this out, it's for free at TanessaShears.com/playbook. All you have to do is enter your email, and I'm going to email it right to you so that you can get started on your new favorite biohack that's going to make you feel like a firecracker in the morning, because I love feeling like a firecracker in the morning. I hope you've had a great experience listening to this today. And like I said, if you love this podcast, don't forget to subscribe, share it on social media, and tag me at Tanessa Shears on Instagram, and leave a review. It really helps the podcast. It helps push it out to more entrepreneurs so we can all biohack together, because let's be real, biohacking and entrepreneurship are like a match made in heaven. More of us need to be doing it. So have a absolutely beautiful week, and I am looking forward to talking to you next week. Ready to begin each day feeling energized and focused? I'd love to work with you one-on-one. In my Becoming Limitless program, you're going to learn how to optimize your brain and body with science and biohacking so you can be highly productive and grow your business faster. Join me over at TanessaShears.com/work with me. I'll see you there.